The Cleveland Browns have traded for quarterback Deshaun Watson and signed him to a 5-year deal, which means they have their franchise quarterback for what they presume to be at least the next half decade. And if Deshaun stays healthy and plays, remember he is 27 years old this year, so there is a very good possibility those 5 years could be 10, or again, depending on how he plays, it could even be longer. But with Cleveland, they also have a quarterback on their roster in Baker Mayfield, who is a former number 1 overall pick and a player that requested a trade, and right before the Browns made the trade for Watson, there was a very slight period of time where the Browns declined his initial trade request and pretty much said you're going to stay on our roster for the entirety of the 2022 NFL season. Granted, that was a very brief period of time, as in maybe a whole 24 hours before the Watson trade occurred, but now we ask the question, what's next for Baker Mayfield, and what is his NFL career path moving forward? Well, like always in the NFL, it's not as simple as he's doing this and that's that, move on and go to the next topic at hand. There are plenty of options here with Baker, and we will discuss every one of them, so without further ado, let's begin. Everyone watching this knows at some point Baker Mayfield will be traded. This isn't an if he gets traded, it's a matter of when. And you have to take a look around at some teams that both make sense for the Browns to trade him to, and for teams that would want to take Baker off of their hands, because right, wrong, or indifferent, there, at least at this point in time, is some baggage with Baker. We'll kick things off immediately by discussing the Indianapolis Colts and why it would make sense for them to trade him, and it's pretty obvious. They just traded their previous quarterback Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders after a not great year from him, and they now need a quarterback. What also hurts the Colts is they don't have a first-round pick because Carson played more than 75% of the snaps needed for the conditional pick they sent to Philly, so that potential second-round pick, as we know, became a first within the trade to Philly, and now Indy does not select until pick 42, which was acquired in the Wentz trade this year with the Washington Commanders. And we know this quarterback class is not great, but we can all acknowledge the first quarterback will be taken well before pick 42. But Indy isn't as shit out of luck as it may seem right off the bat, because they can go really 3 different routes, and all 3 NFL franchises know they can go a different route than making a trade for their backup quarterback, which not only drives Baker's trade value down, but the other 2 guys as well. And they are the 49ers with Jimmy Garoppolo, as they did not trade 3 first-round picks or 2 first-round picks and a swap of 2021 first-rounders for Trey Lance to be Jimmy's backup for the entirety of his rookie contract. And in a somewhat shocking turn of events, Aaron Rodgers signed a 4-year extension, which effectively signals Jordan Love will also be traded at some point. So the Colts could, in theory here, be having a discussion with each of these teams and essentially say to John Lynch, the GM of the 49ers, you know, look, John, I can get Jordan Love for whatever, we'll say a 4th round pick because the Packers have no leverage there with him, or I can send you a 6th for Jimmy G right now. And you may be thinking, well, why would these guys go for so cheap if Stafford went for 2 firsts plus Goff, and Russell went for 2 firsts plus 2 or 3 starters, depending on how you look at it, with Drew Lock, and then of course Deshaun recently with 3 first-round picks? And the answer is none of the current teams we're discussing have any leverage in trade talks at all. Baker could be coming off of the year he had in 2020, which was a pretty good year for him, and if they just did all of that to trade for Deshaun, well, they didn't do that to pay Baker $20 or $25 million to back him up, and Baker wouldn't want to do that either if I had to guess. And also, yes, Baker, Jordan Love, or Jimmy G are not as good as the other quarterbacks mentioned, so yes, that also factors into it. There's also been rumblings that Baker would want to play in Indy, and it does make a lot of sense from his perspective. He'd get a fresh start, play behind a solid offensive line, and have a good running back to hand the ball off to, that of course being Jonathan Taylor. They also have a pretty good young receiver in Michael Pittman, who has had some success in the NFL so far, despite having 2 quarterbacks in 2 seasons and what we know now to be 3 quarterbacks in 3 seasons. And if Baker goes there, the question becomes, can they make the playoffs with him? And I think it'd be close for sure, but I do think they can. They were only a game off this year with Carson Wentz. And remember, Baker at his peak is not a bad quarterback. And a big problem in today's era of NFL fandom is watching the elite of elite play, and if you have a quarterback that may be a tier below those guys, but above average, it becomes a conversation of let's criticize the shit out of them, and if they play bad, which every player at some point will play bad, that's just a fact, then the people that are, and I have quotations around this, but the fans of that team then go on social media and brag when they lose because the quarterback they don't believe in had a bad game. And even when the team wins with the quarterback they don't like or believe in, because God forbid he's not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, they can say, look what happens when he plays a good game. We, the team, wins. He's really not that bad, which is of course setting yourself up to be right, win or lose. And the Baker, I don't know what word to use here. Supporters, backers, or worse, critics did a lot of this in 2021 because when your job is to accurately throw a football from point A to point B and you have a torn labrum, I wonder if that would affect him maximizing his ability to perform his job. And I'm not afraid to go out on a limb and say whichever team trades for him now will be getting a steal of a player, assuming the team around them isn't just complete garbage. Because at the end of the day, situation for quarterbacks matters. And yes, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs have been to 4 straight AFC Championship games, and good for them. I congratulate them on the success. But would Patrick be able to do that if he were on, say, a team like the Houston Texans this whole time? The answer is highly unlikely, and you can't expect a player like Baker Mayfield, who at times is a good quarterback, and at times, as we know, a woeful quarterback, to be traded to a team that has picked in the top 5 of the draft in each of the last 2 years, and say, okay, Baker, lead us to a conference championship, because it simply wouldn't happen. And with the future of Baker Mayfield, you think of a couple of other teams that may be in desperation mode to save jobs, and to me a team like that is the Carolina Panthers, who traded their 2nd round and 4th round picks for Sam Darnold last year. They traded a future 2 and a 4, so that means that is now this year. For Cleveland, it makes a lot of sense as they would trade him out of conference and more than likely never deal with him again, with the exception of playing him once every 4 years, and based on how his career has gone, it might not be more than once. Carolina is desperate for a quarterback, and their head coach Matt Rule is on the hot seat entering 2022, and he could be saying to GM Scott Fitterer, look, we know Sam Darnold is not the answer, and Malik Willis, A, may not be there at 6 overall when we select, and B, if he is a project quarterback, and Kenny Pickett and Matt Corral are not franchise-changing quarterbacks. Offer a 3rd for Baker because they're going to be desperate to move him. To be clear, that would be a future 3rd. And to be honest, I love the Panthers as a landing spot for Baker because if we're going to build Baker back up into the player he was in both 2018 and 2020, I feel like we can acknowledge this and say for the sake of Baker's career. The best possible outcome would not be to place him in a huge market, so both places like we've talked about, Indy and Carolina, or more specifically the city of Charlotte, would be terrific for him because Baker, in a lot of ways, will need to lay low for a bit before we see the fiery competitive player he can be at his peak. And if the Panthers snag him in what we know is a much weaker NFC compared to the AFC, who's to say they can't compete for a playoff spot with him on the roster? The defense they have is pretty solid, and I feel like that's kind of putting it mildly, as in 2021, Carolina gave up the 3rd fewest yards per play in the NFL, the 4th fewest passing yards in the NFL, and the 2nd fewest total yards in the entire NFL. That was with horrid offensive play as they managed just 304 points in 17 games, which equates to less than 18 per game, and a team that had the 2nd most turnovers from an offensive standpoint in all of 2021. Will Baker be the answer to all of their problems? No, of course not. But to suggest he couldn't help at least improve what they have going on down there for a future 3rd round pick when you gave up a 2 and a 4 for an inferior player in Sam Darnold would not make much sense either. And with the division Carolina is in, with Atlanta and New Orleans, Who is to say they can't go 3-1 or 4-0 against these teams next year, as Carolina in week 2 of last season, in one of the very few games where they won the turnover battle, they smoked the Saints 26-7, and Atlanta beat 0 teams that made the playoffs last year, and they are in a very bad situation of their own with Calvin Ridley being suspended for a year and everything else they have going on. So why not trade for Baker if you're the Panthers, as you have nothing to lose and everything to gain? This, to be clear, would be under the belief and assumption they are trading only a future 3 or a 4, because the Browns, as we know, have 0 leverage at this point in time. I absolutely love the possibility of Baker to either the Colts, Panthers, or even Saints if they could make it happen, because like the Panthers, who's to say they can't compete in the NFC if they acquire him for pennies on the dollar and then invest a first round pick in a receiver to help him out even more. I wish the best for Baker moving forward and cannot wait to see how this all plays out. Now, with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, now is the time I ask you to please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because it would truly mean the world. And until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.